I'm going to welcome everyone to today's SILS Connections. I'm Lori Haight, and I serve as the Career Services Coordinator, and I'm so glad you could join us today. We have Sara Trettin, and I'm going to let her introduce herself, and then we'll have time for some questions and answers. Thank you.
Great. Hi, everybody. And I actually would love, maybe when we get to the question answer part, I would love to hear kind of what you're studying as a current student and what your interests are. But I can go ahead and just quickly provide a little bit of insight into my background and kind of how I came to be at the U.S. Department of Education. So I graduated from SILS in 2013. All right. That seems, I mean, does not seem like it was that long ago. So I actually came to SILS. I had started as a third grade teacher in Washington, D.C. at a charter school, spent a year at the Library of Congress with their education outreach program. And that really piqued my interest in libraries and the role that they play in education. And that's how I ended up at SILS. So I graduated in 2013 and had been focused on, I had worked in some of the academic libraries on campus. I'd been interested also in special libraries and actually ended up working in a community college library up in Maryland, Howard Community College, for a year as an information literacy librarian, which was a great opportunity to spend some time in a setting that I had not really spent a lot of time in before at the community college level. So once I spent a year there, I actually ended up applying for the Presidential Management Fellows Program, which I can talk a little bit about if folks are interested in, which is how I came to be in the federal government. My initial placement was in the Office of Educational Technology at the U.S. Department of Education, and I have been there for a little over 5 years now, which is also hard to believe. I did spend, through the program, you do a rotation, and I spent about 6 months working at the State Department with their Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs. But the time that I've spent at the Department of Education has been pleasantly surprising. I didn't really know what to expect, but it's been just a really interesting place to work with a lot of really smart people on issues that are very important to kind of the country as a whole. So there is always something really interesting to be learning about and to be contributing to. So through my time over the last 5 years, I've had the opportunity to do all kinds of things. There's always kind of unexpected things that you would never think that you would have the opportunity to be a part of. I've focused primarily on open educational resources, and specifically right now I'm leading a national initiative called the Go Open Initiative, which is focused on supporting states and school districts that are interested in utilizing open educational resources kind of at scale. So what that looks like is a school district that has chosen not to purchase a textbook for 6th grade science, and instead they are either using an existing open textbook, or they are leveraging their teachers and paying their teachers to develop the resources that their students will use and openly licensing them. So there's been a lot of conversation around open licensing and the role that can play in education in terms of making information available to students and allowing schools and districts to kind of rethink how they're spending their funding. So that's kind of one big area of work that I've worked on, and it touches on a lot of the things that I learned through my Copyright for Librarians class at SILS, in some of the networks that I was a part of through kind of the academic library space at the higher ed level. Another big area that I've been focused on most recently over the last couple of years is around broadband internet access for schools. And increasingly right now, we are focused on not just connecting school buildings, but also thinking about opportunities to connect students at home, especially right now as they are engaging in remote learning. So that's been a lot of work across the federal government with other federal agency partners who have programs focused on broadband infrastructure, but also broadband adoption and digital inclusion. And then also working with state and school district leaders as they are kind of thinking about the federal money they receive, as well as state funding, and how that money can be utilized to build out these networks to connect students to high speed and affordable internet. Trying to think if there are a lot of other things that I've been involved in as well. It's been an interesting opportunity to kind of build more skills around kind of policy, and not like using my research skills, I always joke, my librarian skills, to kind of pull together research and synthesize it, and then write kind of policy memos that get shared with leadership to help inform decision making. Like last year, for example, the department issued a letter in response to an FCC action that they were making a decision on, and that was something that I was able to kind of saw the opportunity, was able to kind of do the research and talk to all the stakeholders and understand the issue in the field, and then craft a letter that came from the leadership of the Department of Ed, kind of stating our position on the issue that was at hand around broadband access for schools. So that was a pretty cool experience. And I feel like I've gone way over my time, Lori, but I'm happy to answer any questions about the Presidential Management Fellows Program, what it's like to work in a federal agency, and also, you know, I am obviously not in a typical kind of library setting. So if there are questions on, you know, how the skills might transfer to a non-library setting, happy to answer any kinds of questions, and also hear what you're interested in.
Well, Sarah, that was one of my first questions about using, part of the reason we're doing this is to expose students and recent alumni to our wonderful alums who are working in very interesting roles. And so you would fall under the category to me as using library science skills outside of a typical library. So that was one of my questions. So I'll throw that out there, but I'm also really interested in how your role, everyone has been so impacted by the pandemic, but it almost seems like part of your work is directly impacted. And so I'd be interested to know how that has shifted over the last 2 months.
Yeah, so in terms of the skills, so it's interesting because when I went through the Presidential Management Fellows kind of selection process, you know, at the end of it, if you are kind of selected as a finalist, you get an opportunity to kind of go to a job fair with a lot of these different federal agencies and kind of pitch yourself to them, I guess, or get hired, I guess is the other way to say that. And it was interesting because I did feel like it required me, a lot of people would look at my library science degree and be intrigued, but maybe not really understand the kinds of skills that I would bring to their agency. And so I did feel like I had to, in those conversations, kind of think about, you know, for this specific agency, what might the skill, how can I translate my skills to the kinds of things that they're working on? that said, I think people are always pleasantly surprised. I actually, with my first supervisor, I had a running joke where it was like, what is the issue? Oh, a librarian can do that. All you need is a librarian. So for example, at the Department of Ed, we do have a lot of, I guess one thing is we as the department, since I've been there, we were able to pass a regulation around open licensing, and there's now an open licensing requirement for the products, the things that get produced using our competitive grant funds. So that was a place where I was able to bring my background in copyright and open licensing directly to impact the work of the department, because it was a lot of educating our internal program offices at the department about, what is the opportunity for open licensing? How can, by openly licensing the things that we're funding people to produce, how does that create an opportunity for others to continue to build on those investments? So it was a lot of kind of internal education and bringing that library science kind of knowledge that I had to the table as part of that, and then also a lot of like interagency kind of education, and we worked really closely with our colleagues at the Institute for Museum and Library Services and a couple of other agencies that were kind of early adopters of similar open licensing policies to kind of like band together and educate our other federal colleagues about the opportunity behind having an open licensing in place, open licensing requirement in place. Another area that I think that I see a lot of use for the skills that we learn. I know I took like databases, and I took some, I dabbled in some of the information science courses as well. And there's just such a strong need for kind of the data, everything that surrounds data. We have some new directives that have come out around federal data and making sure that things are, we're about to launch like an open data repository for the Department of Education, because to date, the data sets that have been created through different programs are all living in different locations. And so there's an effort to have this kind of centralized inventory that can be more easily accessed by the public, thinking about how do you visualize the data and make it useful to people so that people are able to use it to drive decision making. So I think that's another area across any federal agency where there's a lot of overlap and intersection with the skills that you learn in a library science program. I also had the opportunity, because I was like, go librarians, had the opportunity to tack on a piece to an existing initiative that we had launched out of our office, which is called Future Ready Librarians. And it has been focused on how do you kind of translate the role of the school librarian and the skills that they bring to the broader, the principal or the school superintendent, the school district superintendent, so that they can understand, how does the skills that a librarian brings to the table support the work that they're trying to do as a school or a district around using technology and promoting STEM education and things like that. And so that now lives outside of the department, but it is a thriving community of librarians that are kind of focused on that aspect. And then the current pandemic, Lori, yeah, it's very interesting, because I have been focused on issues of broadband access and affordability. we were actually in the process of planning a series of digital equity summits that we were going to start at the end of May. And our plan was to kind of host them regionally and bring together, you know, the education stakeholders, but also other stakeholders within the community to have a conversation about digital equity issues and resources that can be brought to the table by these different groups. And initially, you know, like one of the things was like, well, kind of raising awareness of the digital equity issues that are at play that people might think about but might not be top of mind. And then, you know, schools closed across the country, and the questions around, do students have access to internet, do they have access to the appropriate devices, became very top of mind, because we had, you know, schools and school districts, you know, putting in plans in place to try and keep learning happening during this current closures. So, so that's been pretty interesting to see. And so right now, we're kind of trying to pivot our plans a little bit, because we also will not be hosting in-person meetings, but we're trying to, you know, find ways to support that, both the kind of immediate decision making that's having to happen, and also supporting folks thinking about their long-term planning when it comes to specifically to kind of home access for students, and how that can be something that sustains beyond even the current crisis.
Thank you. I will pause my long list of questions to see if any of the other participants have something that they want to ask, and if not, I'll be back.
Hey, Sarah, it's really cool to, oh, sorry, go ahead, Lori.
Oh, no, I was going to say, and I'm interested to hear who's on the phone and what you all are interested in.
Yeah, I am actually working on the homework gap in Durham as part of Digital Durham's digital inclusion initiatives. And so I'm really curious, like, I know I have other questions about job stuff, but I'm really curious what's happening on the federal level right now in terms of digital inclusion, and what's happening in terms like broadband access, devices, digital literacy. Like it's so huge right now. Cramden, which is a local organization here,
Oh, did you lose Katie? Katie might be stuck.
Katie has said that she's had unreliable Wi-Fi at her apartment.
Oh, she's back.
Where did you lose me? I'm so sorry. I don't know.
Right after Cramden.
Oh, Cramden's whole stock of computers disappeared in about 4 hours, and they just give away computers. That's their whole thing. After, yeah. Anyway, like which suggests to us the numbers are larger than we had data for. That was the only point to that, is we had numbers previously, but the amount of computer requests of people who were qualified to receive free computers were way higher than the data suggested.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, I have been, so I went to I'm sure you're familiar with the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. I was lucky enough to go to their conference last year in Charlotte, and so was, you know, made aware of the many great things happening in North Carolina, and the different initiatives. So what's happening on the federal level? It is interesting. There's a lot. So there are kind of things, specifically things that have come out with the CARES Act, the stimulus bill that was recently passed. And then there's a lot of proposals for, you know, that people are putting forward for a possible like next stimulus bill. So specifically on the CARES Act funding that has already been passed, the Department of Ed received $30.75 billion and that money is going to be distributed through kind of 4 primary program areas. One focused on governors, and the governors they apply for it, but then can choose, do they send it to school districts, higher ed institutions, or other eligible educational entities. So that could be like your nonprofit organization that is helping to support like early childhood education or mental health services or things like that. There's the governor's fund. There's a fund specifically for elementary and secondary ed, so kind of the K-12 bucket. There's a fund for higher ed institutions. And then there is a discretionary fund, which it's going to be 2 competitive grant programs. One's for workforce development, and one will be for reimagining K-12 education. So across all of the funding, there is, so states and ultimately like school districts are kind of, the end recipient is really, it's up to them kind of how they prioritize spending the funding and what they choose to spend it on. But the department did kind of in the application and the call for applications did strongly kind of encourage to think about how do you support the needs around remote learning, whether that's like the device piece of the equation, the connectivity piece of the equation, or the like professional development for teachers to kind of quickly upskill, how to best teach online. So out of the department, that is some funding that has recently been made available. IMLS also received, I think it was $50 million in CARES Act funding that they are distributing out through their kind of state library networks. And they're also prioritizing digital inclusion projects. And then there are some other federal agencies. SCC is doing some things. They've got this Keep Americans Connected pledge that service providers are pledging, to not shut off service if there's not a payment made for this limited time period, and things like that. USDA has gotten some funding for their distance learning and telemedicine program. So there are some pots that have become available through the CARES Act. And then I know specifically for kind of student home access, there are a lot of proposals being floated for the next stimulus that would focus on a program specifically for home connectivity for students, where the funding could potentially be spent on like mobile hotspots and data plans and internet connected devices and things like that. But aside from like the emergency piece, there's a group called the American Broadband Initiative, which is an interagency group of, a lot of the federal agencies that either have funding for infrastructure projects or, do more around digital inclusion and kind of advocating for the end users of those projects. And we have a digital inclusion subgroup that includes folks from IMLS and the National Telecommunications Information Agency, NTIA, and also HUD, because they have some programs that support connectivity for public housing authorities to get the residents connected there. So there is kind of an interagency group that, our goal is to try and coordinate across these efforts and to, make sure everyone's aware of what others are doing. It is always a challenge with any kind of large bureaucracy to make sure that you're like coordinated and that things are actually like working together well and that folks are aware of the opportunities. But there is a lot happening, especially right now, and people are trying to think of, ways that we can help support the field in addressing some of the issues.
Thanks.
Yeah, I want to hear more about your work. I think on the digital inclusion front, one of the things that I was actually talking with folks earlier about is, we're thinking about, are there ways to kind of host some conversations focused on like kind of bringing those state level leaders together. So your state education folks with your state library leaders, with your the people that might be working out of a state broadband office. There are some states that do a good job of coordinating across those different offices. And so we're interested in like being able to kind of pull some of those folks together and highlight some of the ways that they are, finding the synergies between their offices to make a difference.
Are you familiar with Reconnect NC?
I don't know that I am.
Okay, so the reason that I bring it up is it's the Institute for Emerging Issues out of NC State has brought together all the state leaders on digital inclusion and just had, they've had it was a 6-month capacity building, and I just put it in the chat, where they did 6 months of capacity building for local nonprofits, universities, basically leaders that were already doing this work in digital inclusion, brought them all together. It was supposed to actually go on the whole year, but COVID-19 happened. But they were able to get their first conference in. And so if you talk to them, and Maggie is, I'm trying to remember Maggie's last name, but she's very available, and she's their policy expert. But basically, they have already done the work to bring together all of the state stakeholders into digital equity issues in North Carolina. So if you talk to them, that gets you to every single person.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I will definitely check out that website, because that is I think North Carolina is a state that was on my short list of, states that are doing a good job of bringing all those different groups together and finding ways to have that collective impact.
Sarah, Lenny and Katie might already know this answer, but since I have you captured here, how are school librarians in this mix? Is that part of your stakeholders that you're working with, or is that a whole different animal?
So in terms of the home access piece, or?
Well, right, just for school media coordinators, like in terms of, are they, right, in terms of access, or just in any of the initiatives you're working on?
Yeah, so the Future Ready Librarians Initiative, which is actually, it's not in our department any longer. It kind of graduated out into the real world, which is always a good day. So that started in our office, and and at the time, so we had been leading a initiative called the Future Ready Initiative, which was focused on kind of school district level leadership, and it was really around kind of like the holistic needs of a school in terms of transitioning to online learning. This was launched back in 2014, a little while ago now. So the initiative is really like kind of having district leaders come together to think about, not just the broadband connection or the infrastructure piece, but also thinking about how do we, what kind of devices do we need, and what are, and actually the first question is like, what are the learning objectives we have, and what kind of learning do we want happening in our school, and then what technology do we need to support that learning, and what kind of professional development do we need to provide. So kind of like, what are all of the pieces to be thinking about as a school district as you're thinking about transitioning to using technology? And so through that initiative, that's where we kind of plugged in the role of the school librarian. And it was really the kind of purpose was to highlight, you know, here are all the components that you as a school district are needing to think about. So student data privacy was one, the connectivity or internet access piece, the device access piece, around kind of the digital content piece, the professional development piece. And what we did is we drew like a direct line to the school librarian for each of those areas and said, you know, for student data privacy, you know, here are the ways that school librarians can support the goals that you have around student data privacy. And that work has continued, and they continue to hold these like institutes and things like that to bring teams together from school districts. And in the registration process, they encourage teams to include a librarian on their team, so that the librarian is included in the planning and conversations and support for technology in schools, specifically around this kind of school closure shift to learning at home. I have talked with school librarians who, you know, in their school buildings, the kind of device checkout process is managed using their Follett, you know, library, what is it, ILS, integrated library system. And so, you know, they were like, you know, the primary coordinators of, you know, getting all of the devices checked out to students so that they could take them home, and doing kind of the device and the book checkout like in quick turnaround time frames, because they had just learned the day before that, you know, school was going to be closed, you know, starting a couple days out. So that is one way that I've heard school librarians specifically kind of like stepping in and playing a role in the last couple of months.
Thank you. I also had some questions in terms of professional development and networking. So I'm always fascinated about how people position themselves to be in places where they even learn about some of these opportunities. So I didn't know if you had anything from that realm to share. I think Presidential and Management Fellows was a big part, and so we could certainly talk about that. I know every year we have students who are interested, but not every year do we have SILS students that get it. So that's exciting that you were able to have that opportunity.
Yeah, so let's see, in terms of learning about these kinds of opportunities, I was plugged into the Special Library Association while I was at SILS, and then also, you know, through some of my work study I worked in Davis and in the Health Sciences Library while I was there. You know, I feel like those are all good opportunities for kind of connecting with, you know, usually alumni of SILS or just other kind of practicing professional librarians who could, you know, provide insight into some of the different professional organizations that were out there, you know, navigating, you know, some of the different types of libraries and what the experience is like in those kinds of settings. And I had known about the Presidential Management Fellows Program before coming to SILS. I don't actually remember where I initially heard about it, but was able to, you know, so for those that might not be familiar, it's a program that you can apply to either the year you graduate from your master's program, or you can apply 1 year after graduating. So there's kind of like a two windows that you can apply for the program. And the application just launched. I just saw that come through my email. But so how it works is you apply, and there's some stages of the application process. But if you are selected as a finalist, it kind of puts you in, you you're in like a kind of special hiring authority for federal jobs. So they don't necessarily like hand match you with a job, the perfect job, but it kind of puts you in this hiring category that makes it easier for federal agencies to hire you. And so it, you know, kind of sets you up nicely to go to the job fairs or to contact the agencies that you might be interested in, and to kind of connect with folks and say, hey, I'm a presidential management fellow interested in working with your agency. So I was interested in the State Department. I think everybody is, just because it seems elusive or something. But I had also targeted IMLS and the Department of Education, had talked with folks at the Library of Congress, but I don't know that they were necessarily hiring any PMFs that year. But it turned out that, you know, just by kind of meeting, so they have official job fairs, and then there's also, you know, connecting through alumni of your program. I think, you know, UNC alumni generally who have also become PMFs can be really good connections to kind of introduce you and get you connected to the right places within federal agencies that you might be interested in working. And then usually just knowing that you're in that kind of special hiring class, it can make it a little bit easier to get the foot in the door. And it's a 2-year program, and so it has training associated with it. So you do a certain amount of training, which is really nice. You can kind of use that to advocate for training. So I did kind of a range of things, including I did a seminar on through the Interaction Institute for Social Change on like leading, facilitating change through leadership or something like that, which was a really interesting professional development opportunity. And then also as part of the program, you have the opportunity to do a detail. And so you can spend usually 4 to 6 months at another federal agency working on similar issues or completely different issues that might be of interest to you. And it's a good opportunity to kind of get insight into how other federal agencies operate. And then you can return to your home agency. Sometimes people transition to the agency that they were able to detail to, but it is a good opportunity if you're interested in the federal government. It's always good to apply and see if it's an opportunity that works out.
Hi, Sarah. I'm Linny. I have been interested in open access through the scholarly research side, more so than like the specifically open education side, but that's all involved in scholarly communications. That's where I work. You might have had Anne Gilliland for your class, and she's my supervisor, your copyright for librarians class. I'm not sure,
great.
but she's my supervisor for where I'm working at Davis as a student.
Mm-hmm.
So I am aware of like Spark. And Spark is a national organization that does a lot of open education work and open access work. And I was sort of wondering, like, how could someone who's not involved with a federal agency, like, still be involved on a national level?
Yeah, so thinking if you were working at like a university as a scholarly communications librarian. That's a great question. So I have interacted with folks at Spark. We actually, so kind of before our open licensing requirement passed at the Department of Ed, we did a lot of internal education And then we also had some like interagency workshops where we, brought together other like-minded federal colleagues, but we also brought in, folks from Spark and Creative Commons and just some of the other leaders in the open access space to help us educate our colleagues.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so I mean, we have worked closely with like Creative Commons US, which is based at American University, and they were just a huge resource both for like helping us educate, like kind of translating between like the real technical stuff to like, for people that don't have a technical understanding, like what's in it for them, kind of communicating. And then also like connecting us with their networks and helping to find examples of, universities or K-12 schools where they have, or just other organizations who have implemented similar requirements, who could talk about their experience and the impact it's had on their work, because that was really helpful for us kind of getting people on board with the idea of this open licensing requirement. Because, so our grantees now have to, openly license the things that they produce, and that includes, K-12, school district folks, but it also includes a lot of higher ed institutions who are doing different research projects. And so, there was a lot of, question of like, well, how will this impact our grantees? Will they be on board with it? Will there be concerns, and having to kind of think through all those contingencies. So I would say, I know Spark does kind of outside of that interaction we had with them. I know they do a lot of advocacy work on the Hill and two other agencies. So I know, and Creative Commons. So Spark and Creative Commons have done a lot of, work with federal agencies to educate them about open licensing and the opportunity that is there. And so I think that is one way to, like, if you're involved in those organizations, that they likely have opportunities to kind of be involved at a federal level when they're, whether it's, I know Spark was very instrumental in the open textbook grant that is now run out of the Department of Ed. Creative Commons worked a lot with the Smithsonian to get their collections made available with the Creative Commons license. So there are always little opportunities that, I think they are kind of engaging in, and there are ways to kind of connect through those organizations. But I know that, another ongoing conversation is the open access conversation. So at Department of Ed, we have the open licensing requirement, but we also have an open access requirement. And so for research that we fund, there are open access, there's like a relatively recent open access plan, and there's a similar plan in place at most other federal agencies in terms of open access and open data, and thinking about how to organize that in a way and make it available in a way so that the public can access it easily. So if that's your jam, I think there are a lot of agencies that there are some that have been doing it for a long time, like the National Library, NLM. Like getting rusty on my library terms, but they're like the National Library Medicine. So they're like the gold standards that everybody looks to, but there are kind of federal level policies for how federal government does their work that are pushing agencies to have to think about open access and open data and everything that comes along with that. So there is a lot of opportunity there. Does that answer your question?
It answered it on a more federal level, which I guess makes
Part of it.
sense because you're coming from a federal background.
So
I guess
so keep going. What else? What did I miss?
so. Someone who's not on a federal level, in case like I don't try to get to be a federal employee, like in case I just want to stay like, I don't know, at the university level, like how could I get involved with what they're doing?
With what the federal, with
Yeah,
what
those
federal
sort of
agencies are doing, or with what like the Sparks, like the national
Yeah.
organizations are doing.
Yeah, like get them to know like who, I guess this is also like beyond like after I get a job, you know, but yeah, getting involved at the like more national level.
So yeah, I would say, so looking at some of those national organizations, both like the Spark and Creative Commons that are, you know, very focused on open access and open licensing. But I think another place to focus would be, depending on the kind of institution that you end up in. So whether it's a traditional kind of four-year research institution or a community college, within some of those, the national level organizations that serve, you know, higher ed institutions or community colleges, there are also conversations there happening around, you know, open access, open licensing, open textbooks. And, you know, in a lot of, like in some examples I've seen, you know, those groups get called on to come to the Hill and either, you know, and testify, or come to the Hill and like we have different advocacy days where, you know, they'll bring, you know, people that are actually boots on the ground working in the field to the Hill to talk to legislators about, you know, why open access is important, what it looks like at our institution, and what the federal government should be doing. You know, what kind of legislation should be passed to make sure that like this gets expanded, or, you know, whatever it might be. So I think looking at some of those organizations that focus on probably like academic library, like ACRL, I'm assuming has groups that are specifically focused on open access, but also some of like the higher ed professional orgs, because it is a pretty important topic. They're going to have kind of interest groups that exist to kind of both educate internally and also to help advocate for federal resources or you know, federal changes that can further their work. Did I hit it more on the head that time? Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely.
Any last questions that we wanted to make sure we asked while we have Sarah on the screen?
Thanks for your time, Sarah. It's been wonderful.
Yeah.
Super informative. Thank you.
Are you all graduating this month or next year?
Yeah, we just graduated 2 days ago.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, congratulations.
Into this beautiful world.
Really exciting. Are
Yes.
you all, are you kind of hoping to stay in North Carolina? Or are you interested in going anywhere? Kind of, where are you all hoping to land?
North Carolina. I have a house. I know Katie just bought a house too.
Actually, we did not buy a house, but that's
Oh, you
a whole other
didn't?
story.
Okay,
Yeah.
we'll have to talk later.
We can talk later. But I used to be a faculty member at a university, and my partner is a faculty member at a university. So we are in the tenure game.
Dance.
Sorts.
Got
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. So we'll see. we're willing to move, but it's a two-body question.
Right. Yeah, having to coordinate that can be challenging. Well, that's exciting. Well, good luck with the job hunt. I'm trying to think of other like useful information I can share. Are you all on social media? Do you use Twitter? There's just a lot of, it's always interesting to just see like how the networks grow on Twitter. And there's just a lot of opportunity there to start following people and start engaging people that maybe don't live near you, but know somebody who knows somebody that is opening a position. So I would definitely encourage you all to kind of seek out the relevant hashtags or people or thought leaders in the space that you're interested in. Even just to be aware of like what they're talking about is helpful. So.
Well, I really appreciate you joining our first SILS Connections event, and especially because I think it's so timely with what's going on in America right now. And at the federal level, it's always interesting to hear what initiatives are out there. So thank you for taking the time today, Sarah, to join us. And I hope to see our other participants at future SILS Connections events. And thank you very much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was nice to meet you all.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.